Greetings. The Battle of Marathon is one of the major battles of the Greco-Persian Wars, taking place on September 12th, 490 BCE, near the Greek town of Marathon, located approximately 42 kilometers from Athens. First, a few words about the circumstances that led to this battle. The conflict between the Greeks and the Persians began in 499 BCE, when the Greek city-states in Asia Minor, under the rule of the Persian king, revolted. The rebels sought assistance from the free Greek city-states. However, only Athens and Eretria responded, sending 25 of their ships to aid. Together with the Athenians, the rebels managed to capture and burn down the capital of the Lydian satrapy, Sardis. Nevertheless, the Persians suppressed the revolt, and the Athenian expeditionary force, suffering significant losses, was forced to retreat. King Darius was furious. He saw what had happened as a betrayal by the Athenians, who had sworn allegiance to him in 507 BCE, and seemingly agreed to recognize Persian sovereignty over Athens. It is said that every evening a servant reminding him at dinner to remember Athens. Furthermore, the incident with Athens provided a good pretext for seizing all the divided Greek city-states. In 491 BCE, Darius sent envoys to all the independent city-states with the demand for earth and water, meaning submission and acknowledgement of Persian authority. Most major city-states acquiesced to these demands. However, in Athens, the envoys were brought to trial and executed, while in Sparta, they were thrown into a well, with the Spartans offering to take both earth and water from there. In 490 BCE, the Persian army set out for Greece. The first target of the invasion was the disobedient city of Eretria, which the Persians took after a brief siege. The next destination for the Persians was Athens. Upon the advice of the former Athenian tyrant Hippias, who was among their army, the Persians landed on a plain near Marathon. This decision had several advantages. Firstly, there was no need to risk landing near Athens within the sphere of influence of the Athenian fleet and army, which could potentially attack the invading force. Secondly, the Persians aimed to organize their troops over a few days and allow their cavalry horses to recover on the rich pastures of the Marathon plain, thus alleviating the stress from the sea journey. Afterward, they planned to march with a rested army along convenient roads towards the walls of Athens. However, the Athenians did not wait for the Persians and sent their army to the Persian landing site at Marathon, where the battle took place. Before describing this battle, I will traditionally characterize the organization, armament, and command of the two opposing armies. As for the numerical strength of the Persian army at Marathon, there are various opinions. Herodotus did not provide the number of Persian warriors, which allowed subsequent Greek and Roman historians to let their imaginations run wild. For some, this imagination was truly unrestrained, as figures ranging from 100 to 600,000 people were mentioned. However, modern historians are much more modest, estimating the size of the Persian army at 19,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. The Persian cavalry did not participate in the battle, therefore we will not discuss it. What did the Persian infantry represent? At Marathon, the Persian army consisted of Persians and Medes, as well as contingents from subjugated peoples such as Thracians, Armenians, Syrians, representatives of the Scythian people, the Saka, and others. Persian units consisted primarily of professional soldiers, predominantly archers and spearmen, relatively well-trained. The army was divided into thousands, which in turn were divided into hundreds, each composed of tens, referred to as databam. Each databam deployed into a small column led by a dathapates, deaconus. He held a shield, a sparabara, which was a rectangular piece of leather stretched over a wicker frame. Such a shield covered the body from shoulder to ankle. The dathapates was armed with a spear, approximately 1 meter, 80 centimeters long. Behind the decanus stood warriors of his detachment armed with bows. Thus, the front line of the Persian army consisted of 1 row of spearmen, covered by large shields, and 9 rows of archers. If the dathapates were killed, the archers defended themselves against approaching enemies using short swords, achaemenids, measuring 40-60 centimeters, possibly acquired by the Persians from the Scythians. The primary weapon of the infantrymen was the bow, capable of hitting targets at 150, 200 meters, and penetrating Greek armor at short distances. Apparently, the Persians did not have any visible body armor. At least, it is not noticeable in many reliefs. Although, according to some researchers, the Persians could have worn these armors under their tunics. The elite part of the Persian army was made up of the so-called Immortals, of which there were 10,000 in the Persian army, and their unit, apparently, was on the battlefield at Marathon. According to one version, this name originated because Herodotus confused the Persian terms comrades and immortals. Another version explains the origin of the name by the fact that whenever one of the immortals died, they were replaced by another, thereby maintaining the number of immortals constant. They were armed just like other infantrymen, only their weapons and clothing were distinguished by rich decoration, often made of gold. In addition, the spear of each dathapates of the immortals was adorned with a golden pomegranate placed at the opposite end of the spear from the tip for balance. For the rest of his unit, these pomegranates were silver. Like fighters in many professional armies, Persian warriors had a strong sense of camaraderie and a clear understanding of military honor. Therefore, in many battles, they fought very fiercely. A fact even noted by Herodotus, which was quite difficult for a Greek who despised barbarians to acknowledge. In addition to Persians and Medes, the Persian army was composed of subject peoples, with each of these military contingents utilizing its traditional weapons, formations, and tactics. Apparently, many of these contingents included archers. Arab archers used composite bows, while Thracians were armed with small round shields, throwing spears, and short daggers, possibly forming the backbone of numerous light infantry units. Furthermore, the army included hoplites from Greek cities in Asia Minor who, like other Greeks, formed a phalanx and were not inferior in combat qualities to other Greek hoplites. The Greek army's strength in the Battle of Marathon consisted of 9,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. The army represented in the battle was from Athens and included 400 warriors from the allied city-state of Plataea. The Athenian army consisted of a citizen militia ranging from 17 to 59 years old. Typically, the army comprised cavalry, consisting of the wealthiest citizens, heavy infantry, hoplites, and light infantry, peltasts, recruited from the poorest citizens. Peltasts did not participate in the Battle of Marathon. all weapons and equipment of the warrior were purchased at their own expense. A very strong aspect of the Athenian army was the utmost sense of patriotism and some disdain towards the armies of the eastern barbarians. The armament of the hoplites was completely uniform, which distinguished the Athenian army favorably from the diverse Persian army. An important piece of equipment for a hoplite was the shield, called a hoplon, from which the term hoplite derived. The hoplon was a round, slightly convex shield made of wood and entirely covered in bronze, with a diameter ranging from 80 to 100 centimeters. It had a double handle, consisting of a leather strap or metal strip in the center, through which the arm was inserted up to the elbow, and a rope or leather grip at the opposite edge. The shield could be strapped to the forearm, and its convex shape allowed it to be carried on the shoulder. Carrying such a shield was easier than a single-handled shield, although it didn't allow for as much freedom of movement. The hoplon was invariably adorned with a coat of arms, the faces of gorgons, minotaurs, and other well-known Greek monsters. Spartans, however, introduced strict uniformity. They placed only the lambda, the initial letter of the name Lacedaemonians, on their shields. Another distinctive feature of hoplite equipment was the helmet. Several types of Greek helmets are known. The most common was the Corinthian helmet, which completely covered the head and face. It had a T-shaped slit for the mouth and eyes, and later a projection for nose protection was added. In the late Corinthian variant of the helmet, ear slots were made to improve hearing. The Attic helmet did not fully cover the face, but had attached plates protecting the cheeks. In addition to these, the Illyrian-type helmet, which protected the head and cheeks but not the face, was also used. Among the protective gear, two types of armor should be noted. The first type is the so-called muscular armor, stylized to emphasize, sometimes in a hyperbolized manner, the musculature. It consisted of breast and back pieces, fastened with loops, sometimes with a semicircular plate hanging from the front for groin protection. A later type of armor was made of several layers of linen fabric glued together about 5 centimeters thick. It consisted of a corset covering the torso and shoulders, as well as a skirt covering the lower abdomen, usually divided into teruges, flaps, to allow freedom of movement. The hoplite's defensive armor was completed by bronze greaves, often reproducing the musculature of the legs. The main weapon of the hoplite was the spear, the dory, with a diameter of 5 centimeters and a length of up to 2.5 meters, with a shaft made of ash or cornel wood and an iron leaf-shaped head. To balance it, another iron head was installed at the rear of the shaft. It served as a counterweight and could also be used to dispatch fallen enemies, and additionally could be utilized in combat if the main head broke. The hoplite's armament was supplemented by a sword. Two types of swords were used: the xiphos, a straight double-edged sword about 60 centimeters long, and the kopes, a sword sharpened on the inner edge of the blade for delivering slashing blows. Swords were used as secondary close combat weapons and were employed in exceptional circumstances, but the primary weapon of the hoplites remained the spear. The main strength of the armies of the Greek city-states was the Phalanx, a battle formation of heavy infantry, which consisted of warriors arranged in several ranks. The Hoplite Shield covered only the left side of the warrior, but the protruding part of the Hoplite Shield covered the neighbor on the left, forming a dense row with overlapping shields, with each warrior's shield also covering the unprotected right side of their neighbor. This formation, bristling with spears, exerted pressure on the enemy, and if its warriors were not arrayed in a phalanx, it invariably pushed through the enemy's front, leaving them with no choice but to flee or perish, inflicting minimal damage on the opponent. The Achilles' heel of the phalanx was its flanks. In the event of an attack on the phalanx flank, its formation would break, dooming it to defeat. Therefore, efforts were made to either protect the flanks with cavalry or, preferably, find a battlefield where both flanks of the phalanx could rest against natural obstacles, ravines, rivers, marshes, and the like. So, when many movies show Greek hoplites heroically fighting alone against the enemy with spears and swords, and then winning the battle, it's untrue. Try it yourself. Run with a sword while holding a heavy, unwieldy shield on your left arm, using your entire hand to hold it. Moreover, in individual combat, a Persian professional warrior would probably be stronger than a Greek militia member. Recall my video about Socrates. In his youth, he was a sculptor, but as a hoplite, he participated in several battles and even distinguished himself in one of them. I think it's clear that he had little chance of winning in hand-to-hand combat against a professional Persian warrior, who, apart from battles, did nothing else, and moreover had an extremely inconvenient shield for hand-to-hand combat. In reality, the battle went like this. The phalanx advanced with measured steps. The enemy, seeing a bristle of spears before them, completely useless against which were a small sword and a short spear, tries to retreat. But nothing works. The rear ranks press forward. Therefore, the phalanx simply, coolly kills the defenseless enemies, finishing off those who fall with the back of their spears. Panic inevitably sets in. Command over the troops is lost. Everyone is for themselves. Everyone runs away, saving their lives. And if it came down to individual clashes, as shown in the movies, it's a sign that the phalanx formation is broken, and most likely this phalanx will be destroyed. Xenophon described the Spartan phalanx, but how the phalanxes of other Greek city-states were organized, we do not know. It is known only that the Athenian army was divided into 10 taxis under the command of taxiarchs, who represented 10 Athenian dames. The number of taxis, naturally, varied according to the different number of citizens in the deme. From the description of the opposing armies, it is clear that to succeed, the Persian army had to force the Greeks into battle at long range. In close combat, the chances of withstanding the onslaught of the Greek phalanx were extremely slim, and they were unable to withstand the determined attack of heavy infantry. Being involved in hand-to-hand combat with the Greeks or Macedonians, the Persians found themselves at a disadvantage due to the lack of armor and the absence of combat cohesion and discipline on the battlefield. As for the command of the Persian army, everything was in order. The commander appointed was the son of the satrap of Lydia and the nephew of Darius, Artaphernes, which means there was clear nepotism, as the criterion for choosing the commander was not based on merit, but rather on the degree of kinship with the king. However, Datis, the most experienced military leader who had participated in many battles, was appointed as the second commander. He led the Persian army at Marathon, ensuring clear unity of command within the Persian army. The command of the Athenian army was much more challenging, largely due to some of the drawbacks of Athenian democracy. Here, as in other branches of the state mechanism, management was carried out by a board of 10 strategoi. Decisions were made collectively, and no commander had more weight than another. Moreover, the strategoi took turns leading the army. So if a battle occurred when it was the turn of an incompetent leader, the Athenians would have been in trouble. Among the strategoi, Miltiades stood out, an Athenian citizen and tyrant of the Thracian Chersonese. Eventually, he was the one who commanded the Athenian army in the Battle of Marathon. The battlefield, the Marathon Plain, was situated on the shore of the Marathon Bay. It had the shape of a sickle, stretching approximately 9 kilometers in length and varying in width from 2 to 3.5 kilometers. A significant part of the plain consisted of extensive ravines and marshes, rendering it unsuitable for military operations. This made it highly challenging for the Persian cavalry to launch an attack, and consequently, they did not participate in the battle. Therefore, in early September of 490 BCE, the Athenian army, accompanied by allies from Plataea, blocked the exit from the Marathon Plain to prevent the Persians from advancing further into the country. The Athenians also sent the outstanding runner Philippides to Sparta with a request for help. The Spartans promised to send 2,000 warriors, but not immediately. At that time, they were celebrating the festival of Carneia in honor of Apollo Carneos, which lasted until the full moon. During the festival period, a sacred truce was declared, and the Spartans were prohibited from engaging in military actions until its conclusion. The Spartans could only act after the full moon rose, which delayed the deployment of the Spartan army by several days. The two armies had been standing on the plain of Marathon for 5 days already, and neither of them dared to initiate combat operations. Why the Persian army did not attack remains a matter of speculation, although some researchers have put forward several hypotheses. According to them, the Persians decided to immobilize the Greek army at Marathon and load their cavalry onto ships to send them toward Athens, intending to capture the city with a sudden strike. Allegedly, the Greek army attacked when it became clear that the Persians were loading their horses onto ships. This supposedly explains the absence of cavalry on the battlefield. In the Athenian army, when it became clear that support from Sparta would not arrive soon, some military leaders began to advocate for the necessity of abandoning the battle and withdrawing the army to defend Athens. Opinions were divided at the military council. 5 members of the strategoi expressed support for abstaining from battle, while the other 5, led by Miltiades, advocated for an immediate engagement without waiting for assistance from the Spartans. As the votes were evenly divided, everything depended on another member of the council, the polemarch Callimachus. Here, it is necessary to provide clarification once again. The polemarch is one of the members of the Archon Board, essentially the third Archon, who led the army. However, the Archon Board used to lead the government of Athens in earlier times, but by the time of the events described, this board no longer had much power. The issues of army leadership were entirely in the hands of the strategoi, and the position of polemarch was almost ceremonial, similar to the role of a president in parliamentary republics. Nevertheless, the polemarch was traditionally considered a member of the military council, and his voice was taken into account. Miltiades spoke passionately at the council and convinced Callimachus. A decision was made to engage in battle. The next day, the turn to command the army finally came to Miltiades, who then ordered to begin the battle. Miltiades formed the phalanx into a line equal to the width of the Persian front, so that both flanks of the phalanx were supported by natural obstacles, a ravine and a swamp. The Greek line was uneven. On the flanks, the phalanx consisted of 8 ranks, while the center was weakened, only 4 ranks. Apparently, this was not the result of any deep strategic plan, but was dictated by necessity. There were not enough Greek troops to form a full phalanx along the entire front. The Plataeans fought on the left flank of the Greek army, while Callimachus commanded the right flank. In contrast, the Persians had their strongest forces positioned in the center, where the Immortals and other highly trained troops stood. There was about 1.5 kilometers between the Greek and Persian battle lines. The Greeks were tasked with closing the distance with the Persian line as quickly as possible to avoid losses from archers' fire, as any delay could be costly. Herodotus reports that the Greeks covered the distance between them and the Persians by running. However, most scholars believe that the Greeks marched swiftly for most of the distance and only ran in the last 200 meters, that is, from a distance where arrow fire became deadly. During this approach, the Greeks managed to maintain the formation of their phalanx. Naturally, the Persians began to press against the Greek flanks, but the strong Persian center withstood the blow from the weakened phalanx and, in turn, began to advance. It was at this point that a decision was made, determining the outcome of the battle. The Greek forces on the flanks ceased their frontal assault, as the Persians who bore the brunt of the phalanx attack were demoralized, fleeing the battlefield and boarding their ships. The Greek phalanx then pivoted and struck the flanks and rear of the central Persian formation, which was soon surrounded. The surrounded Persians also lost their ability to resist, and their sole concern was to break through the Greek formation and reach their ships. After the defeat of the central Persian formation, the Greeks advanced toward the Persian ships' anchorage, even capturing 7 of them before the Persian fleet managed to weigh anchor and save the remnants of the Persian army from complete destruction. The Persians lost 6,400 fighters, while the Greeks had 192 killed, with a significant portion of them falling to arrow fire from Persian troops during the approach. The fallen Greeks were honored with the highest respect. They were buried on the battlefield, and today the Soros Mound stands on the Marathon field, marking the burial site of the 192 Athenians. However, the danger was not completely eliminated. Departing from Marathon, the Persian fleet sailed toward Cape Saunion, intending to bypass it and capture Athens. Therefore, the victors at Marathon were not destined to rest. Leaving 2 taxiarchs led by Aristides to guard the prisoners and war trophies, the Greek army made a forced march to Athens. When the Persians reached the bay of Phalerum near Athens, where they intended to land, they found the Athenian army once again standing before them. Seeing that the city was securely defended, the Persians did not dare to engage in battle and sailed away. The defeat held little significance for the Persians, as the Persian Empire possessed vast resources. Persia began to regroup its forces and, under Darius's son Xerxes, resumed attempts to conquer the Greek city-states. For the Greeks, the victory at Marathon meant much more than it did for the Persians, primarily on a spiritual level. The myth of Persian invincibility was dispelled, and the Battle of Marathon significantly boosted the morale of the Greeks. Without the victory at Marathon, Greek city-states would likely have struggled to achieve ultimate victory in the Greco-Persian Wars. Several legends are associated with the Battle of Marathon. The most famous of them was recounted by Plutarch, who wrote almost 600 years after it. According to him, after the victory at Marathon, Miltiades sent a messenger named Eucleus to Athens with news of the victory. Having run immediately after the battle for 42 kilometers, he reached Athens and shouting, "Rejoice, Athenians, we have won," fell dead. Later, writers identified Eucleus with Philippides, mentioned by Herodotus, who reported that he was sent to Sparta for help. The final version in the descriptions of later historians looked like this. Philippides ran over 200 kilometers to Sparta, returned, immediately participated in the battle, and then was sent to Athens. The exhausted body simply could not withstand such a strain, and Philippides died after the last run. This legend gave the name to the sport discipline, marathon running for 42 kilometers, 195 meters. It should be noted that this story undoubtedly is legendary and did not happen in reality. There was no need to send any messengers if the entire Athenian army returned to Athens after the battle with a forced march. So, the story of the Battle of Marathon is concluded. Goodbye.